And we're like, okay, it's time to go. And we went in, like, she was like blacking out, and we had to put her in the wheelchair and take her down to the car. I think it was our first. Just to set the stage. Just so you know what's happening. I think like at a park, like in the stairwell. Yes. Yes.
Good morning, buenos dias, and welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Church of San Antonio. Our weekly worship is where we connect, share information, and inspiration. My name is Carol Collins. After finding this church to attend a Pride conference, I became a member after attending for 2 years. Currently, I serve as Green Team co-chair and a Twig Chalice group leader. I have managed the church bookshop for 25 years, and I've served in several other ways over the years. Let us begin by recognizing the early name of this place, Yanaguana, the traditional lands of the Kawil Teka people. They and all their plants and animals were the original stewards of this land. Let us remember their care and live with the understanding that we belong to this place. At our church, we strive to enact a universal love that binds us in mutual care and affection, especially in our work for justice for all and for our planet. Our faith is all-inclusive and all means all. If you are new to us or visiting for the first time today, we welcome you to fill out a visitor's card. We'd like to get to know you and follow up with you. Wherever you are on your life's journey, we hope you will find your place with us.
Thank you, Carol. Carol is a force. Our UU history features generations and generations of people who've asked a lot of questions. Like many of us, they mostly came from other religious traditions into Unitarian or Universalism. And this involved a genuine struggle and personal risk for them relevant to their experiences of religion. These were thinkers, doubters, seekers, all people for whom integrity and authenticity counted a great deal. And through processes of direct experience and theological reinterpretation, reason, and even revolution, they found ways to continue their search for truth and meaning in their religious lives. Today, I'd like to explore with you some of our spiritual DNA. But first, given that we like to say that we all have the spark of the divine in us, or some kind of a spark, I'd like you to reach out and connect with a neighbor you know or don't know and say hello. Let's do that for a couple of minutes. I love our robust greeting of one another. I want to invite you to turn in your gray hymnals to number 108 and rise in body or spirit, and let's sing all three verses of this endless song. you, and please be seated. I love the sonorous tones of all of us singing together. Choir has my back, you have my front. I'm in the midst of some wonderful singing this morning, and thank you all for singing out that way. Time for our chalice lighting.
The flaming chalice unites our members in worship and symbolizes the spirit of our faith. As people with many questions, let's light our chalice with a few of them. What will I learn today? What new thoughts and ideas will I explore? What difference can I make? What can I begin today that might endure? Where did I give love? Where did I allow myself to receive love? From all my questions, how is my life's purpose being furthered? Now let us continue today with the service as a beloved community.
Thank you, Carol. We are called as Unitarian Universalists to build the beloved community where all are welcome as blessings. May we strive to share grace and forgiveness with ourselves and each other in the hope of becoming whole and reconciled. Each week we affirm this promise to live and behave as a community in covenant. Let's recite our covenant that articulates our promises and binds us together in community. You may read it in your order of service or on the screen. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humanity in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with each other. And in Spanish, el amor es la doctrina de esta iglesia. Su sacramento es la búsqueda de la verdad. Y su oración es el servicio. Convivir en paz. Buscar sabiduría en libertad, dar a la humanidad nuestro servicio fraternal, para que todas las almas crezcan en armonía con la divinidad, así pactamos el uno con el otro. Muchas gracias. pacem. Grant us peace. We'd like to send that everywhere around our big, beautiful world, especially in areas that have no peace right now. Dona nobis pacem. Thank you, choir. Thank you, Susan and Jaime. What a important and beautiful reminder of who we are. It's time for our candles of joy and sorrow. All of us strive to make a difference, and our feelings about these efforts and those of others bring us joys and sorrows. Let's take some time this morning to recall our feelings and needs, all the needs that they involve. We invite you to come forward and light a candle of joy or sorrow, or both, and to express your feelings about these many things. Jaime, bring us some beautiful music. Please come down the side aisles and find your way back up the center aisle. Thank you, Jaime. And thanks to all of you for bringing feelings, concerns together. Our book of joys and sorrows has this to share with us today. Is there a Hadley in the house? Hi, Hadley. We'd like to share the joy of celebrating Hadley's 9th birthday. Your family is so proud of the person you are and you are becoming. Happy birthday, Hadley. That's a big joy. There are so many joys and sorrows in our minds and in our hearts. Violent conflicts, old wounds reopened, health concerns, all kinds of global, local, familial, and deeply personal events and cares. May our gathering today bring us closer together as beloved community. One of our board members and facilitators of Core 24 reminds us today in the sharing of our joys and concerns that we need your input, and we'll give them a good listening to, and we need to know where you want us to go to as a church over the next 5 to 10 years. And so that's the purpose of Core 24. It'll also give our board, who will be listening, better ideas of what minister to look for in our future. I believe very much in ministerial influence in our future. And as many of you know, since I'll be entering my 75th year next month, it's not going to be me. After the end of July, I'll be with you till then. So let's get ourselves prepared, huh? Yeah. Core 24. Joys for the dog distribution system. How many know there's a dog distribution system? Which chose my family for the goodest boy, Buddy. Yeah, you go, Buddy. You love your new family. And please send lots of healing thoughts to my mom, Terry Chadwick, written by Tess Bobo. Just doesn't seem to be improving. We want to lift up our beloved Terry Chadwick. Send her healing thoughts. And happy birthday to Jesse Garcia, celebrating 12 years today. And on a more sober note, my dear brother Pat died a year ago today of brain cancer. Let's remember Pat's family and how much they miss brother Pat. For all our joys, sorrows, concerned, stated, written, felt, held in the silence of our hearts, may we feel empathy and compassion. And may the caring of our community offer a space of deep kindness, loving, and just action. Amen. Mary Grace Ketner. It's been a while since you've given us a story, and we invite you to come forward to tell the story of the Tims, also known as Born Wise, a story written by Eleanor Farjian, who is responsible for the lyrics of one of our favorite hymns, Morning Has Broken. Think of Eleanor as Mary Grace gives us this story wisdom.
Oh, I'm so glad to see you already walking up. Thank you. Come on in. Let's have a seat. I want to tell you a story called The Tims. You see, there were 5 Tims. Oops, I'm talking too fast, aren't I? Go on. There were 5 Tims. There was Old Tim, there was Big Tim, there was Little Tim. Counting with me? There was Young Tim, and there was Baby Tim. And they was all born wise. And whenever people in that village were vexed about something or had a little problem or just feeling sorry for themselves, they'd go talk to the Tims to get advice, because the Tims was all born wise. Like when Farmer John had some beavers staying in his barn overnight and they gnawed on the handle of his hay fork, he went to see old Tim, who was 80 years old. And he found him sitting on a stump with his clay pipe in his mouth. And he said, "Howdy, old Tim." And old Tim said, "Why, hi, Farmer John. What brings you out here?" And Farmer John said, "Well, the beavers spent the night in my barn last night and they gnawed on the handle of my hay fork. What would you do if you was me? I'm asking because you was born wise. And I'll do whatever you say." And so, old Tim thought about it for a while. And then he said, "I'll tell you what I would do. I would go see my son, Big Tim, for he's but 60 years old, and he's closer to the wisdom he was born with than I am." And so what do you think Farmer John did? He went looking for Big Tim. And he found him sitting on a gate, chewing on a stem of wheat. And he said, "Lo, Big Tim." And Big Tim said, "Why, Farmer John, what are you doing out here?" And Farmer John said, "Well, I come to seek your advice because you was born wise." And he told him all about the beavers and the hay fork. And then he says, "What would you do if you was me?" "I'll do whatever you say." And Big Tim said, "If I was you, I'd go ask my son, Little Tim. He was born wise too, and he's a lot closer to the wisdom he was born with than I am, so why don't you go ask him?" Well, Farmer John just did that. He went and he looked up Little Tim. He found him sitting by the creek. He was eating an apple.
And he told him about the fork and stuff.
He did. He told him about the hay fork and stuff. And then he said, "I come to ask your advice because you was what? Born wise. And I'll do anything you said," he said. "What would you do if you was me?" Well, he thought about it. He ate another bite of his apple. And then he said, "Well, if I was you, I would go ask my son, young Tim. He's only 20 years old, so his wisdom is a lot fresher than mine." So Farmer John went off to find young Tim, and he found him sitting on the back porch with a toothpick in his mouth. He said, "Hello, young Tim. What's up around your place?" So Tim told him all about the hay fork and the beavers and everything. And then he said, "I come to ask your advice because you was born wise. And you just tell me what you'd do if you was me, or I'll do whatever you say." Well, what do you think? Old Farmer John went to find
His son, Baby.
I forgot to say that. He told him to go see Baby Tim, didn't he?
Yeah.
And he found him lying in his cradle, sucking on his thumb. "Why, hello, Baby Tim," said Farmer John. Baby Tim took his thumb out of his mouth, but he said nothing. "I come to ask you what I should do about the beavers in my barn that chewed on my hay fork, because you was born wise. So what would you do if you was me?" "I'll do whatever you said." And Baby Tim went. He took his thumb out of his mouth, but he said nothing. And so Farmer John went home and did it.
Said nothing.
Well, now you and I know that some things you just need to do something about right away, but we probably know the difference. And the folks in that village, whenever they had a little problem, they just kept going to the Tims. Like the time the miller's wife was washing her clothes in the river and her husband's handkerchief got away from her. She did nothing. And when Molly Garden got a penny that was counterfeit in change from the peddler, she did nothing. And when the preacher come home singing to the moon late one night, they all did nothing, because they had a legacy of wisdom passed down through 5 generations of Tims who was all born wise. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. And if you don't like it, you can just go ask the Tims what you should do about it, because they was all born wise.
Let's sing our children out. May the road you travel guide you safely. May a friend be always at your side. May the love you find here in this moment guide your way and fill you with delight. Que sea seguro tu camino, que un amigo esté siempre a tu lado, que el amor que sientes este momento te guíe, te llena de placer. It's time for our invitation to generosity. May we be generous as a reflection of how we value our church community. For those of you viewing online, we invite you to contribute on our website. And those of us in the sanctuary may contribute to the baskets being brought forward by our ushers. Please come forward, and thank you for passing the baskets. Let's enjoy a favorite song sung by Barb Dauerty.
The colors of the rainbow
Thank you for that positive reminder, Barb. Jaime, thank you. And thanks for the service of our ushers. I invite us all to hear these words. We can, each and all of us, make a difference in life, and may we be blessed as we bless others. For your generosity, we give thanks. May it be so. From my childhood, I've had an insatiable appetite for knowledge. I belong well to this species, Homo sapiens, wise humans. It seems like I fit in real well here. We human beings are always eager to learn. And we ask a lot of questions, like, who am I? What's the meaning of life? And we find some advice, more than doing nothing, from religions that provide some answers to questions and stimulate reflection about others. Questions about the nature of humans and the nature of the divine. These have long dominated our thinking. And I know for a fact that most of us here consider ourselves lifelong learners. We're always eager to learn something new, and hopefully I can bring something to bear about that today. You know, mostly I think what we're seeking are direct experiences for ourselves, to deepen our life's understanding and expand our vision. Someone as wise as Joseph Campbell once said that he didn't think that people were seeking the answer to what is the meaning of life. They're seeking on how to directly experience life, to become more alive and lively. There's some wisdom in that. Years ago, when I began to doubt the answers supplied by my childhood faith, Roman Catholicism, I first visited a UU church. I was on holiday vacation from college with my family in Midland, where I grew up. In my late teens, I knew I had found someplace different at UU church. A community that cherished freedom and encouraged open dialogue on questions of faith, religion, politics, and social action. And this was 1968. And Vietnam was in the forefront, as well as civil rights. And I saw more clearly than ever in that company of those UU adults what a generation gap I had between me and my parents. Remember the generation gap? It was refreshing and even shocking to me as I sat in this small discussion circle that older Unitarian Universalist adults actually wanted to know what I thought and also expressed views much different than my parents. I asked myself, what is it about these UUs that makes their life so different than that of my parents? Our UU history features generations and generations of people who have asked a lot of questions. And today I'm going to focus a little bit on the early history. There's a part 2 that will come up in November that will feature more contemporary ideas of our Unitarian and Universalist history. But through it all, there are these processes of direct experience, theological reinterpretation. We don't just necessarily buy whatever theology comes down the pike. We want to examine it. We want to apply some critical thinking to it. And we want to see if it checks out in our hearts and in our actions. We want to engage all these things with our reason and even cause ourselves to experience transformation. And so many Unitarians and Universalists have found a way to apply these principles to their search for truth and meaning. Now, much of the Jewish Bible, which Christians call the Old Testament, is an epic story of the roots of the Jewish people beginning more than 6,000 years ago. UUs ourselves draw principles and values from these Judaic scriptures as well as Christian scriptures, and I'll be focusing on this Judeo-Christian heritage a little bit more this morning because that was sort of the original heritage that he came into. Both Unitarians and Universalists came out of these traditions. Our theological and ideological beginnings were in Jesus of Nazareth, as found in the Gospels, the letters of Paul and others, and in these early church mothers and fathers. Now, it's important to understand that history, for our own understanding of our UU heritage and the search for the truth that has guided it. Summing this up, Robin Myers writes in his book, Saving Jesus from the Church, that the epic roots of our religious forebears is a story of our journey from narcissistic and tribal understandings of faith to a death-defying embrace of universal worth and dignity of all of life, including creation of the earth, including the earth itself. I like to think of Unitarian Universalist in those kinds of glorious terms, an epic search for justice and community that is very inclusive, very open. But as I say, our theological and ideological beginnings were in Jesus of Nazareth. And so, I want to move beyond the narcissistic and tribal understanding of his life and take off as a point of exploration, which I hope will continue to occupy our own exploration in life. What we believe today was not handed down on some stone tablets or dictated by God to human secretaries. It all came from human minds and experiences, sometimes inspiring, oftentimes fallible and contradictory. So let's look at some of these. Did you know that there was no unity in the Christian faith or doctrine during the first 300 years after Jesus? Diversity in thought and practice was the rule in hundreds of Christian churches and fellowships. About a decade after Jesus' death, he died in around 30 of what we call the Common Era. We used to call it Anno Domini, the year of the Lord. Now it's more academically understood to be not AD, Anno Domini, but CE, or the Common Era. Jesus' immediate followers in and around Jerusalem found themselves in a conflict with Paul of Tarsus, also sometimes known as St. Paul or Paul of the letters to various Christian churches. This was a conflict over the nature and practices around the life of Jesus of Nazareth. The earliest church council was held in Jerusalem in 49. It met to decide whether or not Gentile or non-Jewish converts should be circumcised. Up until then, almost all the Christians were Jews. They just happened to think that Jesus was a great rabbi and they were enjoying his teachings. But there was an argument about circumcision. Now, the result was a compromise. Jewish Christians were circumcised. Gentile Christians weren't. And I take it that they're talking about the male of the species here. Orthodoxy and liberalism struggled from the beginning in Christian expressions. And to understand the early differences in their evolution, it's important to establish a few dates and sequences of writings that make up the Christian Bible, which we often call the New Testament. And of course, the inevitable process that took place of altering the spoken words of Jesus as some of his followers began marketing him as the Messiah. Now, the four Gospels were written between the year 70 and 95. But the letters of Paul came first in the mid-first century, about the year 50. Then came the Gospel of Mark in the year 70, and Matthew followed in 80, and Luke came in 90. These three, Matthew, Mark, Luke, are called the Synoptic Gospels because they resemble each other enough that scholars believe they were probably written from a single source document, that they all shared that information in some of the parables of Jesus and the stories of Jesus' life. The realization that Paul wrote his letters before these Gospels gives us some insight. He makes no reference to Orthodox doctrines mentioned in the Synoptic Gospels, such as the virgin birth or the empty tomb. Paul doesn't talk about those. There's no sense in Paul's writings that the miraculous resurrection was actually a physical one. Paul describes it as a spiritual realization that God came alive in Jesus' life. Jesus was empowered by the Spirit of God. All of the Gospels seek to define the incarnation, the mystery of God's presence in a person. And Jesus of Nazareth was a man of deep faith and exemplified a life-changing message in his actions and teaching. And in the Gospels, one can trace a growing interest in the message of Jesus as a Messiah rather than as a Nazarene man. Marketing had begun. For example, Paul writes that Jesus became God's son by a kind of adoption when God came alive in him after this Easter phenomenon, this spiritual resurrection. Mark, the first gospel, moves the adoption by God earlier in Jesus' life when he receives the baptism from John the Baptist. There's a voice from the heavens, "This is my son, in whom I am well pleased." That's how the story goes. That signifies an adoption earlier on in Jesus' life, in his late 20s, the time that he began about a 3-year ministry. Matthew and Luke deify Jesus as God's son even earlier they emphasized the virgin birth. Not in Mark, not in Paul. Finally, in the 2nd century, the publication of the Gospel of John at the very end, 95, 96, 98 of that 1st century, Jesus is described as the author of time itself. He's the cosmic logos, a Greek word meaning the Word of God. One and the same with God, with no human parent whatsoever. The Word of God who spoke all of creation into existence. That's what John writes. Pretty heavy. John's gospel is the only one which shows Jesus as the only way to salvation. The messenger had become the message, which was accomplished in this divine rescue mission, death on the cross for our sins. This grand event and universal atonement trumped the living example and wisdom teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. And consequently, it seems today that most of Christianity worships the messenger and ignores the message demonstrated by Jesus' life of forgiveness, care for the marginalized, and eloquent teachings in parables. Perhaps this explains how millions of Christians can support aggressive wars and oppose things like universal health care while simultaneously asking, what would Jesus do? Unitarian Universalism does not worship the messenger. Why not? Most modern-day Christians, both Catholic and Protestant, think that what they read is the official church-approved Bible, and it tells the whole struggle. They're largely unaware of those 300-plus years of diversity and argument that followed the death of Jesus. And the letters of Paul and others and the Gospels are only a small percentage of what actually was written and circulated during the decades after Jesus' death. Now, looking at that history and its contemporary application in today's Israel and Gaza, 40 years after Jesus, the Roman army marched into Jerusalem to quell a Jewish rebellion, and to make sure it didn't happen again, they completely sacked the city and the temple, and thousands of Jews had to flee. And they spread through the diaspora, mostly around Europe and North Africa. And they didn't really return to Israel until 1948. So that's part of what we're looking at today and what's going on there. Some of us like to say that we practice the religion of Jesus and not the religion about Jesus. I have no judgment of condemnation toward people who believe that Jesus is one and the same as God. It's their belief, and I honor their belief. It's not my belief. It used to be my belief. I've changed. Maybe some of you have too, or at least on the way. I'm here to visit with you about it if you do have questions and you'd like to talk with me about it. I do not mean to disparage Christianity or Catholicism or Judaism for that matter. You know, here at our Unitarian Universalist Church, we respect and revere all religions for the wisdom that they teach. So I'd like to conclude this portion of my talk about seeds of UU heritage with a quote from a letter from St. John. No one has ever seen God. But if we have love for one another, God is in us, and God's love is made complete in us. I like that. May it be so. Whew, that was a mouthful. Let's rise in body or spirit and take our gray hymnals and turn to number 287, Faith of the Larger Liberty. That's what we're doing. Let's sing about it. Rise in body or spirit. From here with curious hearts, with caring hearts, with courageous hearts, that we might awaken ourselves and all those with whom we connect to the best, freest possibilities of life. May it be so. Enjoy one another, love one another.